Even during times of change, people still buy things, but what they buy is a little different. And if you can spot those trends or opportunities, now's when you can really thrive and reinvent.
Welcome to Work Smart. I'm Amber Mack. In unsettled times, individuals and businesses are always looking at new ways to innovate. On today's show, we talk to the chief trend spotter at trendhunter.com about his top 5 tips to discover new opportunities and reinvent your business. Before we talk to Jeremy Gutsche, here's an innovative way to share your social stream online. Memo Lane lets you capture your posts, updates, tweets, and more in a timeline, so your internet memories are always just a click away. Once you pull in your favorite web services, you can easily see what you were up to in the social media world on any given day. I caught up with Jeremy at the new Trend Hunter office to ask him about his top 5 ways to innovate.
Well, my first one's about mindset, and for this I'm going to reference Peter Drucker, the most famous management theorist of all time. And he said, it's not the questions that change, it's the answers that do. And what's so inspiring about that is that when we go through a time period of change or chaos like we have over the last few years, people often get a little bit intimidated. But if you actually look back through history, you'll see that a lot of the most iconic companies were founded during periods of economic recession. Companies like IBM, Microsoft, Apple, GE, even Fortune magazine. So the takeaway is that even during times of change, people still buy things, but what they buy is a little different. And if you can spot those trends or opportunities, now's when you can really thrive and reinvent. Yeah, too often what actually stops people from getting into new markets or finding new ideas is the idea that you've got a business to run, so you keep doing things the same way you have in the past. But one way that you can escape or get a big company to be a little bit more aggressive and innovative is to create a gambling fund. Now, my story here comes from the BBC. So at the BBC, innovation means coming up with new TV show ideas. But in the late 90s, market shares started to fall. People stopped tuning into the BBC. So when that happens, the one upside is that your CEO and CFO get fired, and you get a new CEO and CFO. But these new characters came in and they wanted to find a way to make this big organization a little bit less rigid. At the same time, they couldn't really shake things up too much. So they put in a gambling fund. Ideas that failed through the normal screening process could still qualify for gambling fund money. And the idea that did was The Office, which went on to become their biggest hit in history. And a little story here is all about Brahma and the legend of Marcel Tellis. Now, Marcel Tellis became their CEO almost 20 years ago, and he stepped into Brahma, which was the #3 beer maker in Brazil, and it was struggling. But he grew up on a trading floor. He liked people to be active and intense and sharing ideas. But in most corporate offices throughout North America, what happens is that people are separated in offices and cubicles. So he broke all that down within Brahma, put everyone in the same room in the type of open offices that you see in many companies today. And what that did is it caused ideas to flow a lot faster. Jump ahead almost 18 years in Brahma, as of last year, became the world's #1 largest beer maker. At Trend Hunter, obviously, we're spending a lot of time looking for trends in all different industries, but one of the reasons why it's so important is because in places where creativity is critical, companies force themselves to look in other industries. And as an example, I was interviewing a head designer at Ferrari, and I asked him, how do you spot trends for Ferrari? And I expected he would tell me, oh, I look in racing or I look in other automotive companies and see what they're up to. And he said, actually, he spends half of his work time designing female fashion accessories, and he has an entire line of temples for dogs. And his quote to me was, you need to be more open of the complete possibility of what could be.
For our last tip, it's all about observing the world around you.
Sure. So as the Trend Hunter guy, I'm obviously going to tell you about how to hunt trends, but the twist I'm going to tell you now is how it's so important to start with your own customers. So if you look at companies that are leading edge, what they actually do is they force themselves to watch their customer in the zone, to interact with them, to better understand them. Now, as an example, I was interviewing the head of design for GM. And if you think about someone who's got a role like that, that's a pretty spectacular position. He's got a pretty huge team. So when he needs to find out more about his customer, he could have done a survey, he could do market research, he could get someone on his team to make a video. But what he did was a little different. So I asked him about the Escalade, which I was curious about because it's the greatest selling SUV of all time. Instead of doing those traditional forms of research, what he did is he went to the most dangerous neighborhood in Detroit. And I want you to think, who's driving the Escalade in the most dangerous neighborhood in Detroit? And when he saw that Escalade, he waved it down, and the Escalade pulled up, and the window rolled down, presumably to take his order. And he said, excuse me, young man, but I designed this vehicle, and I was wondering if I could accompany you on a ride alongside your business for the day. And you can imagine how uncomfortable that is, but in all these situations, those uncomfortable positions are the ones that really help you get more than what you'll simply see with data, to understand what your customers' needs are, how they describe their products, and what the new opportunities might actually be.
On the topic of innovation, we asked you what trends you're following right now, and here's what you had to say.
Jabez thinks geolocation-based marketing is the next big thing. Andy has his eye on gamification. As for Chris, he is watching out for 3D projection mapping and augmented reality.
That's all for today's show. To see past episodes and to give us your feedback, all you have to do is head on over to fastcompany.com/worksmart. See you next week.